show you a hand sewing technique to invisibly close up a seam. This is a really good way to repair garments that have got a popped seam in them when you can't get it under your sewing machine or if you don't have access to a sewing machine. It's also a really good way to close up holes in ties, whether it's a waist tie for a dress or something like that, something that you've had to turn it all the way through. This is a really good example of one, is this little tie on the sleeve. That was just a little rectangle of fabric, so it needed a hole to be closed after it was made. It also works really well to close up the seam of a jacket when you've got to close up the inside of the lining so that you can't tell where the hole was that you had to turn the whole jacket inside out. So it's just a hand sewing technique, but it's a really good one to know so you can finish things off really nicely and well. This is a jacket lining that we're closing up, but you can use the same technique to repair holes or close any other holes that's similar. To do it, you need to have some matching thread and a nice sharp hand sewing needle. You don't want an embroidery needle that's blunt on the end, it does need to be sharp. I quite like the milliner's needles. You can get various lengths and they've usually got a decent sized hole to put the thread through. So I usually thread the needle before I cut it off. I just find that a little bit easier to do personally. This particular seam I'll quite often double my thread over, but for this particular one I actually prefer to do it single layer because machine thread tends to knot a little bit easier if you double it up. So I do prefer to just use a single layer of thread. And the length of thread, when you're hand sewing, you don't want it to be too long because that again gets caught up in knots. So the length of thread from the needle to where you cut should be only about the same length as your forearm. So from my needle to the end of my thread, that's only just the length of my forearm. I just find that a lot easier to do. Because any longer than that you're going to get knots, but shorter than that you need to rethread your needle too often. So the first thing is the knot. So wrap it around your finger so that it crosses over itself like that, and then push the tail over and roll between your thumb and your finger until you reach the tip of your finger. Then grab your middle finger and then pinch that knot and pull away from each other. And then you're just pinching between your thumb and your middle finger there, and you're tightening that knot up further. Whatever you do, you don't want to let go and then pull the end, because you can actually undo that if it's not tightened properly. But once you've got it nice and tight, the more you pull from this end, the stronger it gets. So that's a knot that will never come undone. And it also gives you a nice big knot, because you don't want to have a small knot on something like this, because if it's the same size as your needle, it's just going to come straight through the hole that your needle makes. So you need to make sure you get a nice big knot. And then you find your hole. Because you'll have sewn up to either end, the hole will automatically fold where you want it to be sewing, which is great. That's really useful. If this is a hole that you're repairing in a garment, the end might be running a little bit, so you want to start back from the end a bit. But if it's a garment that you're making that you're just finishing off, you should have done a back stitch here, so it'll be nice and strong, so you can just finish right on that end. So what I do now, we've got this big thick knot in the end. I just pull it up underneath my fabric so that the knot ends up on the inside of the garment, and then pull the needle through. Just right on where that fold is, where the seam will be. Then you pull that through, and you're just going to pull these two tight. It's really important that the hole here is evenly balanced. You don't want a seam that looks a bit like this, where one side is longer than the other. Although you can fix that, it is a massive pain to do, and if you haven't done this technique very often, it'll be really difficult, so I wouldn't even bother trying. So now we've got our thread threaded through, you're just going to go directly opposite that, and you're just going to go along the fold, take a little stitch, You want these stitches to be quite nice and small. That keeps it more consistent with the rest of the seam. So just take a little stitch along the fold and pull that through. You don't have to pull it really tight, but just get most of the thread through. And then you're going to go back again, just directly opposite that, back through that fold, and again just with a nice small stitch there, and pull that through. Again, I'm not actually pulling it tight yet, I'm just creating a couple of rungs of essentially a ladder. Then just directly opposite that next stitch again, come back in on our fold and out again. It doesn't matter if all your stitches aren't exactly even. The important thing is that wherever you come out on one side, you go back in directly opposite it, so that once you've got a few stitches going, yeah, you'll probably find that one side you make smaller stitches than the other. It's just the nature of hand sewing, and that's fine as long as each time, like I said, you're just going through directly opposite each time you swap sides. So then you end up with this sort of ladder thing, and then once you've made a few stitches you can pull all of them tight and it will just pull them all closed, and then you can't even tell where the end was. But if you just pull that tight and then you just keep going the whole way along the seam. It's not a particularly difficult one, it's just that if you make one of your stitches too long, so here for example I haven't come directly opposite my stitch, I've just made that a bit too long there, so you can see if I pull that tight I end up with a little bit of a bubble in there. So that's why you've got to be careful about keeping your stitches nice and even directly opposite each other. That's the only important thing with this technique, is just keeping them nice and even along each side, and as long as you're doing that you're going to be fine. It will take a little bit of time when you're first starting out, but once you've got the hang of it you can start to speed up a little bit, and it's just nice, and it's a nice easy thing to do in front of the TV really. Just hand sewing back and forth, small stitches. You can do bigger ones, that's fine. If it's not in a very obvious place, then bigger stitches will obviously make it go a bit faster. So that's just up to you personally. Small stitches just keeps it nice and even and makes it more invisible. So if it's just for a lining or something and you don't really mind, then bigger stitches is totally fine to do. Once you're getting close to the end, just make sure you're pinching it so that you can see where you're going to join up with where your seam finishes. Again, if this is repairing a hole, you might want to take a few stitches further just to make sure that you're not going to unravel anything. But if this is on a garment, you should have back stitches there, so it should be nice and strong. So you only just need to meet up to it. So I'm going to get the last couple stitches in once we've got those last few stitches in, we need to tie a knot in our thread to finish off that seam. So what I usually do for that is I'll go to the opposite side of whichever side I've just pulled my thread out of. So in this case that's going to be over here, and you just put your needle under just a few fibers of your, just a really small amount, maybe even less than that, just a few bits of thread, and pull that through, and then do it again in the same spot, and then this time before pulling it through, pull it so you've got a loop, and then thread your needle through it, through the loop, and thread your needle through the loop a second time, and then you can pull that, and you can see there that's tying a knot. Just pull that down, stick your thumb on it to help pull that nice and tight, and then I usually do that twice. So I'll just make a second loop just directly on top of the first one, and then through the loop and through the loop again. And this is quite a good knot, but it's not hugely strong if you cut the thread right down here, because what will happen is that can actually start unraveling if you cut too close to the knot. So rather than cutting it right there, what I then do is I'll put my needle back in the fabric and run my needle to the wrong side or just to the inside. So this is completely bagged out jacket, so I'm never going to see this. So I'm just going to pull my needle through over here and pull it through. So then I've got a tail between here and here, and I'm just going to cut my thread there, and then that just disappears on the inside of the garment. You'll never see that again, and I've made a nice secure knot there, and I haven't had to cut the tail too short. And then you've got, there's your seam along here, and it's nice, and it's a nice and visible repair or way to close a hole. And that's all finished. So the main thing is to secure it with a nice big knot at either end so that they're not going to unravel at all, and to keep your stitches nice and even. The smaller they are, the more invisible, but as long as they're even, it's still going to be really nice and tidy.